I was the ghost in the room. That is how I had learned to survive corporate life. Be useful, but never visible. I moved quietly through the mahogany silence of the 40th floor conference room. Executive Suite C. The air conditioning was set too cold, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and fear. They were talking about billions. We were talking about the merger between Omnicorp, my current employer, and Titan Holdings, a deal that would redefine the industry. I was there to replace the chilled water carafe, clear the sticky rings left by forgotten coffee cups, and ensure the crumbs of the artisanal sandwiches were gone before the next round of discussion started. My name is Nia. Officially, I was a research operations assistant. Unofficially, I was the designated cleanup crew whenever the stakes got this high and the senior assistants were too busy. I wore my best suit. It didn't matter. They only saw the apron of servitude draped across my shoulders, invisible but heavy. The man speaking was Mr. Julian Sterling, CEO of Titan Holdings, the shark. He was leaning back in his Italian leather chair, radiating entitlement, his voice booming over the sound dampening. And, of course, the valuation hinges entirely on the seamless integration of Project Chimera, Sterling declared, slapping a hand onto the massive bound contract in front of him. Without Chimera, we are buying a paperweight. The IP is ironclad, yes. I was 3 feet away, meticulously folding discarded napkins into a bin. My breath hitched, but I didn't stop moving. The IP is ironclad. That was true, but not in the way Sterling thought. Project Chimera was the revolutionary code base that made Omnicorp's technology indispensable. It was the entire engine of the merger. Without it, the deal was dead. Everyone in that room, including my own CEO, believed the IP was owned outright by Omnicorp, licensed, controlled, locked away. They were wrong. They knew I had worked on the integration team early on. They knew I'd stayed late for months, debugging the final architecture. They had no idea I was the original architect, the lonely genius who had coded the foundation late at night in a dingy rented office before Omnicorp bought my tiny startup for peanuts 5 years ago, a startup they quickly dismantled, retaining only the basic framework, failing to see the true potential of the core innovation. I had kept the core IP register separate, secure, waiting. They had dismissed me then, as easily as they dismissed me now, wiping their crumbs off the table. They valued the mahogany above the mind. The discussion tightened. The CFO of Omnicorp, a nervous man named David, leaned forward, assuring Sterling, "It's secure, Julian. We reviewed all registries. Everything is in order." Sterling grunted, unconvinced. His eyes, cold and calculating, suddenly fixed on me. I was reaching for a spilled drop of water on the lacquered table edge, my back, mostly to the group. I was trying to disappear back into the wall. He stopped the conversation instantly. Every gaze turned my way. "Excuse me," Sterling called out, his voice sharp and laced with disdain, like a poorly tuned piano wire. I froze. I turned slowly, my hands resting on the edge of the service trolley. I met his eyes. "You, yes, you," he said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Nia, is it?" I nodded once, quietly. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" "Nia," he repeated, dragging the sound out, making the name sound foreign and inconvenient. "Are you enjoying the show?" The atmosphere thickened. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Why would they? I was just a prop. Sterling chuckled, a dry, abrasive sound. "I find it truly fascinating, the level of focus required for men to discuss $1 billion transaction. The mental agility." He paused, leaning in dramatically, gesturing to the cleaning supplies on my cart. But then I look over and see Miss Nia, painstakingly ensuring that the sugar bowl is perfectly centered on the condiment tray. Truly meticulous work. He smiled, a humorless sneer. A different kind of focus, wouldn't you say, gentlemen? A more simple focus. He leaned back, waiting for his audience to react. My CEO, David, gave a weak, forced laugh. The others followed suit dutifully. A ripple of polite, powerful cruelty spread across the table. The noise hit me like a physical blow, not the insult itself, but the collective agreement, the easy assumption that the tasks assigned to me defined my entire capacity, that my value stopped precisely where the dirt began. It was the echo of every door slammed in my grandmother's face, every assumption made about my father's honesty, every time I had been told to stay in my lane, the clean, quiet lane. I felt the familiar hot sting behind my eyes, but I locked it down. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not ever again. I lowered my eyes, forcing my expression into a blank mask of compliance. "Excuse me, sir," I murmured, reaching back for the dirty water pitcher. "Oh, don't run off, Naya," Sterling pressed, enjoying his momentary performance of dominance. "It's important to acknowledge everyone's contribution, isn't it? Perhaps you can tell us, Nia, from your vantage point, which folder is the most important?" He pointed to the stack of identical black binders, outlining the merger details. He was baiting me, treating me like an intellectually inferior spectacle. "I couldn't say, sir," I replied, my voice dangerously steady. "I have only been focused on the cleaning schedule as requested." "See, gentlemen," Sterling addressed the room, tapping his pen on the contract. "Focus, priorities. We worry about the IP valuation. Nia worries about the crumbs. That's the difference between the 40th floor and the basement, isn't it?" The laughter this time was louder, more confident. My heart was no longer racing with shame. It was pounding with cold clarity. He had just given me permission. Permission to act on the plan I had been meticulously building for years, waiting for the exact moment when the insult outweighed the risk. I pushed the cleaning cart silently out of the room. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, sealing them inside their tower of arrogance. I walked 20 paces down the hall until I reached the executive break lounge. I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I took 3 deep, measured breaths. I looked at my hands. They were the hands that wiped their tables. They were also the hands that wrote Project Chimera. I pulled out the expensive corporate-issued smartphone, the one they paid for but constantly monitored. I switched it off and pulled out the SIM card. Then I took out my second phone, the burner phone, paid for in cash, used only for critical communication, with my own private, specialized legal counsel. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang once. A cool, professional voice answered. "This is Miss Albright. We are ready." "They mocked the cleaning schedule," I stated, my voice flat, professional, entirely devoid of emotion. The CEO referred to my focus as simple. He compared the IP discussion to scrubbing crumbs. A heavy pause on the other end. "I understand, Naya," Ms. Albright replied. "The final trigger is pulled?" I looked back down the hall, toward the closed oak door, where they were still discussing my $1 billion creation, believing it was theirs. "Yes," I confirmed. "Initiate the transfer of the IP registry immediately. File the preliminary injunction. Block the merger access point." "Understood. The acquisition agreement is nullified the second our filing is confirmed. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I thought of Sterling's sneering face, fixed on me like I was a speck of dust he was about to brush away. I thought of the countless hours of invisible work, the sacrifices, the dignity stolen in a single dismissive joke. "I am prepared," I told my lawyer. "Let them finish their coffee." I ended the call. I felt a strange lightness, a profound and terrifying relief. The silence of the hallway pressed in around me. Inside that room, they were still celebrating their impending wealth. Outside, the foundation of their deal had just been vaporized. The next thing I had to do was walk back in. not as the cleaning staff, but as the only person who could save or sink the whole operation. I smoothed my suit jacket, adjusting the shoulders. I straightened my spine, feeling the sudden, rigid weight of true power settle in my posture. I turned back toward the executive conference room. I did not rush. They wouldn't know the deal was dead yet. They wouldn't know the key to Chimera was gone. They would only know when I told them. The shock was going to be biblical. I reached the massive oak door. My hand hovered over the brass handle. I needed to open it and deliver the first message, the first necessary shock before the real war began. But I knew I couldn't just tell them. I had to show them. I needed to finish the job Sterling had so carelessly interrupted. I was going back in, but first I was going to finish cleaning the table, perfectly, meticulously, before I erased their company. My lawyer's warning echoed in my mind. Are you prepared for the fallout? I took a deep breath. Yes, I was prepared for the fallout. But were they prepared for me? I opened the door, stepping back into the silence. Sterling looked up, irritated by the interruption. He was still grinning. I pulled the cleaning cloth back out of my pocket, walked directly to the table, and began wiping the exact spot where he had rested his arrogant hand. This time, I wasn't invisible, and I had a message to deliver. A message about crumbs, priority, and the true cost of disrespect. I am not the cleaning staff. I am the architect. This was just the beginning. Part 1 ends. I pushed the heavy cart quickly, past the polished mahogany door. I didn't stumble. My hands, covered by standard-issue latex gloves, clenched the metal handle until the knuckles were white. Sterling's laughter was still clinging to the air behind me, thick and mocking, a sound that always meant someone black was about to pay for existing. A little scrubbing goes a long way, doesn't it? He hadn't meant the floor. He meant me. He meant the assumption that a young black woman in a corporate setting must be the help, must be invisible, must be someone whose value could be measured by the cost of the floor cleaner she pushed. I maneuvered the cart into the utility closet, a windowless cell near the executive washrooms. It smelled of bleach and damp mop heads. This was my observation post, my sanctuary. My uniform, the heavy blue tunic, felt like lead now, but I refused to tear it off. Not yet. He saw the uniform and saw servitude. He didn't see the woman who funded the merger team he was currently addressing. He didn't see Amara Dubois. Sterling, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, the company attempting the hostile takeover of Phoenix Technologies, was relying entirely on an IP asset he believed his corporation had successfully purchased 8 years ago. Project Nightingale. Nightingale wasn't just code. It was the crucial compression algorithm that made the $1 billion merger even possible. Without it, Nexus Dynamics was a ship with no engine, and Sterling's arrogance stemmed from the fact that he was convinced he owned the engine. He was wrong. He had bought the rights to Nightingale version 1.0 from my late father for a pittance. After my father suffered a career-ending injury and needed cash instantly for medical bills, Sterling's legal team treated my father like a desperate amateur, rushing the paperwork, dismissing the patents as overvalued. My father, Dr. Marcus Dubois, was many things, but an amateur was not one of them. He knew exactly what they overlooked. The fundamental flaw in version 1.0, the one Nexus thought they had, was only solved in version 2.0. The proprietary architecture, the key patents, the critical modifications, they were all filed, registered, and maintained under a private holding company, a company named Shadow Star Acquisitions. And Shadow Star Acquisitions was run by me, Amara Dubois. I didn't just work at Nexus Dynamics. I had spent the last 7 months working inside Nexus Dynamics. I accepted the low-level administrative contractor role 4 months ago. Then, 2 months ago, I successfully applied for the rotating cleaning shift. Why? Because you learn more about a company's true health from the people emptying the trash cans than from the executives shuffling PowerPoints. And I needed to know if they truly understood how much they needed Nightingale 2.0. I needed to know the exact moment of the merger vote, the exact vulnerability point. I had planned to wait until the final documents were signed, until the ink was dry, to reveal myself, trigger the IP protection clauses, and demand fair market value for my father's life work, a value that would instantly bankrupt Sterling's entire deal structure. My goal wasn't merely wealth, it was correction. It was dignity for my father's legacy, something Sterling had stolen and smeared with his corporate indifference. But the laughter, the mocking suggestion that I should go scrub a little more of the room while they discussed billions, it cracked the cold, strategic veneer I had built. I pulled out my phone from the hidden pocket inside my cleaning tunic. I wiped the screen with my glove. The audio feed from the boardroom, routed through the discreet surveillance microphone I installed last week in the ventilation unit, was perfectly clear. I heard the dry, measured voice of the Phoenix Technologies CEO, Ms. Albright, beginning the final summation. And of course, the integration hinges entirely on the successful deployment of Nexus's cornerstone asset, Project Nightingale. I smiled a cold, thin smile in the dark closet. Yes, Ms. Albright, it does. I opened a file folder on my phone. It contained a single, highly sensitive digital document. The formal notification to Nexus Dynamics, Phoenix Technologies, and the Securities Exchange Commission. It stated clearly that the intellectual property required for this merger, specific elements of Project Nightingale 2.0, was under immediate protected lockdown and was currently owned by Shadowstar Acquisitions. The document also held the name of the sole executive of Shadowstar, Amara Dubois. I held my thumb over the send command. The gravity of the moment felt immense, far heavier than any cleaning cart. If I sent this now, the meeting would explode. The deal would collapse into dust. Sterling's career would be crippled, perhaps destroyed entirely. I hesitated only for the duration of one deep breath, drawing in the smell of bleach to remind myself of the humiliation. Then, from the speaker, Sterling's voice cut through again, dismissive, casual, and utterly arrogant. We shouldn't waste time discussing old software, Albright. Nightingale is ours. It's a formality. That was it. Formality? Dismissal. I pressed send. The screen flashed confirmation. The digital packet was already speeding across the network, landing simultaneously on the phones and laptops of every participant in that lavish boardroom. I could hear the dull background noise of the meeting continuing, unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to crack open. I adjusted my uniform. I pulled the cart handle back toward the boardroom door. It was time to stop cleaning the room. It was time to clean house. I took one final look at my phone. The clock showed the exact moment the documents landed. I needed to be back in that room in 60 seconds. I needed to be there when Sterling read the name Amara Dubois and realized who was holding the mop. My heart was hammering, not from fear, but from the quiet, dignified certainty of the revenge I was about to serve. The hum of the HVAC unit was loud, but Mr. Sterling's voice was louder. He was detailing the financial projections now. Millions turned into billions, tossed around the mahogany table like monopoly money. I moved slowly, replacing the used sugar packets in the ceramic holder. My spine still felt stiff from the indignity. The mop belongs to you, little girl. His words weren't just about class or service. They were about ownership, about who had the right to be in that room, and who existed merely to wipe up the crumbs they left behind. They moved to the technology and IP portfolio slide. My breath hitched. This was the moment. The valuation holds steady, pending the finalization of the Atlas engine integration. Sterling announced, tapping his pen sharply against the screen. My fingers gripped the edge of the tray I held. Atlas Engine. That was the name. The name I gave to the deep learning algorithm I had spent 3 years building, perfecting, and legally protecting. Sterling continued, oblivious. It's a necessary proprietary component. We purchased preliminary licensing from Aurum Solutions LLC 2 years ago, as most of you know. We just need the final perpetual license transfer signed off to lock in the total valuation. Aurum Solutions LLC, my company. A shell company, built with the specific goal of keeping my identity separate from the technology during its infancy, protecting me from exactly this kind of corporate theft or dismissal. They thought Aurum Solutions was a small, faceless third-party contracting firm operating out of a strip mall office in Delaware. They didn't know Aurum Solutions was me, just me, sitting up every night, writing code that stabilized their entire infrastructure plan. I remembered the early meetings with their legal team. They had been dismissive then, too. They talked down to the young black woman in the loose-fitting suit who was trying to explain machine learning architecture. They had been eager for the IP, but utterly incurious about its creator. They assumed some aging white male engineering genius was running the show behind the scenes, and I was just the overly enthusiastic assistant filing the paperwork. They got the paperwork. They got the IP, but they never got the key. That key was the master access key, the one necessary piece of source code that allowed the perpetual license transfer to activate the platform across the merged entities. I held that key, digitally encoded on a secured server housed 800 miles away. Mr. Sterling leaned back, a smug look of utter confidence washing over his face. "We expect the transfer to clear tomorrow morning," he confirmed to the group. "Once the final license agreement is signed and the master key is confirmed, the deal is airtight. We proceed." He made it sound mechanical, simple, like signing a receipt for dry cleaning. He had just belittled the woman who wrote the code in the presence of the code's financiers and was now banking the entire 1 billion merger on her signature. The irony was a bitter taste that burned away the shame. I looked across the table. Miss Henderson, the COO who had watched me being humiliated without saying a word, avoided my gaze. Her silence spoke volumes. She knew. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the slight flinch when Sterling had spoken. She chose her allegiance, power, not principle. Suddenly, a memory flashed. My father, years ago, when I was struggling to pay for coding boot camp after my scholarship ran out. He was an electrician, and he had come home tired, hands raw, but beaming. He told me, "Baby girl, they pay us for our labor, yes, but they can never truly pay us for the knowledge we hold. They can try to hire your hands, but they can't buy your brain unless you let them." I hadn't just sold them the labor. I sold them a highly structured, conditionally licensed product. And the conditions were about to change. The CEO started talking about his yacht vacation planned for the post-merger celebration. Another joke at the expense of someone who works for a living. That was the line. I stopped polishing the silver serving platter. My hands, which had been performing the ritualistic tasks of servitude, went still. The room faded. The noise of the merger projections became a dull buzz. I saw the deal laid out before me, fragile. Sterling thought he was minutes away from victory. He wasn't. He had insulted the foundation of his empire. He had mocked the architect of his success. My internal voice was calm, ice cold. It was time to show him what happens when you treat the foundation like dust. He needs the key to activate the perpetual license. But that key had just expired, not on the system, but in my heart. I looked at the CEO's self-satisfied face one last time. The deal wasn't just cancelled. It was about to be obliterated by the very person he thought only existed to clean his room. I straightened my apron. A small, resolute movement. The fight had started, not with shouting, but with quiet, absolute control. Tomorrow, they would wait for the master access key. And tomorrow, I would finally give them the truth. I retreated to the quiet corner of the third floor restroom. The sterile, white marble walls felt cold against my skin. The echo of Mr. Thorne's dismissive laugh still rang in my ears. Wipe the dust, Aisha. He didn't just see a cleaning crew member. He saw nothing. He saw a nameless placeholder who could be easily ignored, easily stepped over. But that dust he mocked, it coated the biggest corporate deal of his career. And the key to unlocking the entire future of Global Zenith rested right here, in the history they thought they had successfully erased. I pulled out the old tablet, the one my grandfather, Papa Leo, insisted I keep hidden. It wasn't the physical hardware that mattered. It was the archived correspondence and the digital copies of the foundational contract. It started 30 years ago, in a dusty workshop in Raleigh. Papa Leo, a brilliant but unsung mechanical engineer, had developed the core mechanism, the cross-spectrum synchronization array. A terrible technical name, but absolutely groundbreaking technology. He was black, self-taught, and running dangerously low on funds. He took a single meeting with a young, sharp attorney, Arthur Thorne. Yes, the same Arthur Thorne, now the CEO of Global Zenith, demanding I wipe his spilled coffee. Thorne promised partnership, promised capital. He promised visibility for the black inventor who deserved recognition for his work. What he delivered instead was a complex, suffocating contract that systematically chipped away at Papa Leo's ownership, clause by carefully buried clause. They funded the initial patent application, but ensured all subsequent revisions belonged to Thorne's fledgling company. Yet, Papa Leo retained the foundational IP rights to the initial design specification, a tiny overlooked section they thought was obsolete after the first major revision a year later. They built Global Zenith on the back of his mind. They scaled up, revised, and iterated the hardware over decades, spending billions. But every single iteration, every profitable upgrade, was an undeniable derivative of that original foundational schema. The contract stated that any major ownership transfer or M&A activity involving the core technology required written explicit consent from the original IP holder or their direct heir. It was a loophole. Papa Leo's small local lawyer slipped in, betting on the long game and the oversight of arrogant men. Papa Leo never forgot it. He wasn't entirely bitter, but he was fiercely strategic. He taught me about the difference between owning the physical product and owning the very foundation upon which it stands. He died last year, and the rights transferred silently, legally, to me, Aisha Dubois, junior administrative assistant, sometimes assigned to cleaning detail. Thorne and his board were so arrogant, so confident in their massive legal team, they assumed the original paperwork was defunct, irrelevant, or simply lost to time. They never even bothered to look for Papa Leo's heir. Why would they? We were, after all, invisible. I dried my eyes and stared at my own reflection. I focused on becoming the granddaughter of Leo Dubois, not the frightened junior staffer who just wanted to fade into the wallpaper. The meeting was scheduled to restart in 10 minutes. They were going over the final valuation before signing the letter of intent with Nexus Dynamics, the acquiring company. I had to listen. I needed to know exactly how vital the array was to Nexus's 1B valuation. I had to calculate the exact cost of my long overdue silence. I slipped back out, moving through the service corridors. Invisible in my gray uniform, I reached the ventilation shaft directly above the main boardroom. The access panel was loose. Years of maintenance neglect made my next action easy and silent. I could hear them clearly now. The integration timeline looks tight, Arthur, a crisp, anxious voice, Nexus Dynamics lead counsel, said. We need absolute assurance on the intellectual property chain. Zero ambiguity. Thorne scoffed, his voice tight with impatience. Don't insult us, Michael. It's ironclad. Global Zenith has held the cross-spectrum tech for 30 years. We own the patents. We control the ecosystem. But does Global Zenith own the base layer? The very foundation? Michael pressed, his voice sharp with professional paranoia. Our analysts flagged a potentially ambiguous subclause regarding the very first iteration patent filing from 1993, the one filed under Dubois' name. My heart hammered against the floor beneath me. They knew the loophole existed, even if they hadn't found me. Thorne laughed again, that same arrogant, dismissive sound that curdled my blood. A historical footnote, Michael. Dubois sold those rights decades ago. His heir, if he even has one, has no standing. The contract is clear. If the IP isn't actively leveraged or claimed after 25 years, it defaults automatically to the primary license holder, which is us. We crossed that threshold 5 years ago. Thorne was lying or dangerously mistaken. Papa Leo's lawyer had written in a mandatory annual notification clause. Every January 1st, a certified letter asserting ownership continuity was sent to Global Zenith's legal department via a shell corporation that Papa Leo funded annually, a letter they routinely dismissed as junk mail or a clerical error year after year. Letter that legally kept the ownership perpetually active, preventing the default threshold from ever being met. I smiled then, a slow, cold realization washing over me. They didn't just underestimate me, the person cleaning their spills. They underestimated Papa Leo, the quiet genius. They underestimated the legacy he built specifically to protect against their exact form of institutionalized theft. The conversation continued. Nexus Dynamics was making it clear, without full, indisputable ownership of the entire historical chain of the cross-spectrum array, the merger was dead on arrival. The entire 1B valuation was based entirely on securing that technology, which Nexus planned to immediately license globally. My decision was solidified. This was not just about money. This was about restoring dignity. This was about honoring Papa Leo's quiet strategic fight against the powers that sought to erase him simply because of the color of his skin and his lack of high society connections. They needed me. They needed my silent signature, my legally mandated consent, my very existence. And they were about to find out exactly what invisibility costs when the invisible holds the power. The boardroom door rattled open. Thorne needed his coffee refills. Time to face the music. I checked the small encrypted recording device in my pocket. Their admissions were secure. My leverage was ready. I straightened my uniform, smoothed the frown from my face, and prepared to re-enter the room as the cleaning lady. The game was about to shift entirely. I memorized the section title from the old tablet one last time. Section 4.C3, Successor Consent and Notification Tenure. I walked toward the double doors, my mop bucket clanking softly on the polished floor. I knew exactly what I needed to say to ensure every penny of that billion-dollar deal vanished into thin air. The tension was building, a silent wave ready to crash over Thorne's arrogant empire. I paused just outside the room, taking a deep breath. They were waiting for their coffee. They were waiting for their deal. They were waiting for Aisha Dubois. And I was finally ready to deliver. The laughter died slowly in the plush carpet, but the sound echoed in my chest. It was a cold, absolute silence that settled over the polished mahogany. I continued wiping the surface. Muscle memory took over. My hands moved steadily, gathering the crumpled napkins, stacking the empty coffee cups. I moved like a ghost, invisible and necessary. They didn't see me. They saw the role. They saw the brown skin doing the service work, exactly where they believed it belonged. Mr. Thompson chuckled once more, clearing his throat. Excellent, Janelle, he said, using the wrong name, but too lazy to correct himself. See that the new projections are run immediately. We can't afford any slippage on the Q3 integration. He was talking about the merger that relied entirely on the IP I held. Every motion I made was deliberate now. I bent down to retrieve a discarded whiteboard marker. When I straightened, I wasn't the cleaning girl anymore. I was a CEO deciding whether to demolish a competitor. The words Thompson had used earlier, "I'm happy she keeps us grounded," had been a spike driven directly into the quiet decisions I had made months ago. Grounded. As if the only reason I understood humility was because I was forced to perform labor they deemed beneath them. I knew the technical projections better than the junior analyst currently fumbling with his laptop in the corner. I had written the original API for the data migration platform 7 years ago. The entire security infrastructure of this billion-dollar deal was built on the architecture I had personally secured and licensed. Thompson assumed the IP belonged to the shell corporation he was acquiring, but he missed the specific non-transferable personal use license that I, through very careful and expensive legal maneuvering, had retained. The license had been set up under my grandmother's trust name, an obscure legal structure, perfectly clean, perfectly invisible to corporate due diligence, performed by men who never looked below the surface. I paused at the door, holding the heavy tray of dirty glassware. My reflection caught my eye in the dark glass of the emergency exit sign. For a brief second I saw my father's face, the lines of exhaustion he carried home after his 12-hour shifts as a hotel custodian. He was grounded. His entire life was spent propping up the lives of others. And Thompson saw me, his highly educated, brilliant technical director, and placed me squarely back into that inherited role of servitude. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about proving that the value of the person cannot be erased by the simplicity of the task they perform. My phone, the one they didn't know about, the secure, encrypted device, reserved only for my legal team and my offshore holding company, vibrated once in the hidden pocket of my apron. It was Miss Davies, my lawyer. She confirmed that the final transfer document was ready, the document that revoked the IP license, effective immediately upon delivery. If I cancelled the license, the merger agreement instantly collapsed. The security protocols Thompson needed to present to the regulatory body would vanish. The company valuation would plummet to zero overnight. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the sterile, hushed hallway. The air conditioning was biting cold. Thompson's personal assistant, a young woman named Chloe, rushed past me, talking loudly into her headset. "Yes, tell the London team we're 99% finalized. We just need to finalize the intellectual property transfer next week. Everything hinges on that." I kept my head down. I continued walking toward the service elevator, the tray still heavy in my hands. "Janelle," Chloe called out suddenly, stopping her conversation. I stopped and turned. My expression was perfectly neutral. "Did you take the meeting notes too? Thompson needs the summary of the capital risk assessment before lunch," she said, tapping her pen against her tablet impatiently. The audacity of the request was stunning. They truly believed I was an amorphous utility, capable of cleaning the room and summarizing complex financial models simultaneously, without credit or respect. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I did not take the meeting notes." She looked irritated. "Well, who will do it? Just grab a copy from the server and summarize it quickly. We're on a tight deadline." I held her gaze. Her face shifted from frustration to mild confusion. There was something in my eyes she hadn't seen before. A stillness, a finality. "I am currently prioritizing a different deadline, Chloe," I stated. "One that will require Mr. Thompson's undivided attention very soon." I didn't wait for her reply. I stepped into the service elevator and pressed the button for the underground parking garage. The doors slid shut, sealing me off from the executive floor. I placed the tray on the floor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the secure phone. No more waiting. No more humility. I opened the coded message to Miss Davies. My thumb hovered over the send key. I thought of the look on Thompson's face when he realized the cleaning girl had built his kingdom and was now dismantling it. It would be magnificent. I typed the single necessary word, execute. The message delivered instantly, but that was only the legal beginning. Now, I needed to get back upstairs. I needed to witness the fallout myself and ensure the delivery of the second, much more painful document. I needed to make sure Thompson understood exactly who had cancelled his billion-dollar future and why. I needed to see his recognition. I pressed the button for the 50th floor again. The elevator reversed direction, humming its way back up toward the heart of the crisis. I still had the rest of the dirty glassware to deal with, but first I had a CEO to address. The storm was coming, and I was holding the key to the floodgates. The stillness in the room was heavy, not the quiet of attention, but the sudden vacuum where power used to reside. Maxwell's face was slick with sweat. He tried to speak, but only a wet clicking sound came out. The others, the bankers, the investors, the merger VP, looked at me. They weren't seeing the mop bucket anymore. They were calculating the zero that had just been added to their fiscal reports. I looked down at the polishing cloth in my hand. It felt ridiculous, heavy, a symbol of everything they thought I was. "You still haven't addressed my question, Mr. Maxwell," I said, my voice low and steady. It cut through the thick air. "Why would I, a person you saw fit to mock and demean merely minutes ago, ensure the success of your billion-dollar venture?" Maxwell finally choked out words. This is insane. A deception. You were hired by Meridian Cleaning. Your employment records are clear." I smiled slightly, a genuine tired smile. "I was employed by Meridian Cleaning, yes, for the last 4 months. It allowed me access, proximity, and visibility. I let that sink in. They thought I was observing them, but I was simply existing in the space they designated for people like me, invisible." I turned to the lead legal counsel for Synergy Tech, a stern woman named Miss Davies. "Miss Davies, I believe you reviewed the documentation for Project Chimera last year. You found the licensing structure complex, opaque, but ultimately sound. Do you recall who holds the rights to the underlying core encryption model, the one that guarantees the security infrastructure of Synergy Tech's AI?" Davies, whose face had been white since I spoke the name Chimera, swallowed hard. "The rights are held by a Delaware-based holding company, Aegis 7. The signatory is listed as A.R. Johnson." "And that is me," I confirmed, setting the polishing cloth carefully onto the edge of the mahogany table, exactly where Maxwell had just rested his expensive watch. "Amara Roslyn Johnson." I didn't wait for them to process it. I continued speaking, addressing the years, the forgotten hours, the sleepless nights they had dismissed. Project Chimera wasn't complex to be difficult. It was complex because that was the only way I could secure it. After 5 years of pitching this technology, being told it was too ambitious for my background or that it lacked the market credibility of larger, whiter firms, I learned to build my own castle of paperwork, invisible until it needed to be seen. I pointed toward Maxwell, who was now leaning heavily on the table, trying to appear composed, but his hands were shaking violently. "You, Mr. Maxwell, saw me cleaning the residual coffee stains you left. You looked straight through the woman who owns the foundation of your future success and decided she was only worthy of your cheap ridicule." He lunged forward, trying to pivot to save the money. "Amara, listen, this is a misunderstanding. A bad joke. You were doing a job. We respect hard work. I meant nothing by it. It was corporate banter. Stressful day. He was pathetic. The arrogance was replaced by a desperate, sickening pleading. Do you know what real respect looks like, Mr. Maxwell? I asked him. It looks like acknowledging the humanity in the room, regardless of whether that person holds a cleaning spray or a PhD. You failed that test spectacularly. I reached into my blazer pocket. Not the cleaning uniform one, but the tailored one I kept nearby. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. This document was prepared by my private legal team at 5 a.m. this morning. It is a formal, immediate notice of withdrawal of all proprietary licenses held by Aegis 7, effective immediately, non-negotiable. I slid the paper across the table, directly into the pool of sweat Maxwell had left behind. You need Project Chimera to secure the merger. Without it, Synergytech's value drops by 40%, and the security architecture fails regulatory compliance. The room erupted. Investors started shouting at Maxwell, demanding answers, demanding to know how he missed this. Maxwell stammered, his eyes darting frantically. You can't do this. We'll tie you up in court for years. We'll find a loophole. We'll buy Aegis 7. I shook my head slowly, enjoying the sudden reversal of fortune. You won't, Mr. Maxwell. Aegis 7 has a protective structure that even your corporate raiders can't penetrate easily. And more importantly, you won't, because I am not interested in your money or your court battles. I walked toward the large window, looking out over the cityscape that symbolized all the towers I was never supposed to enter. I am interested in justice. You valued me at $0 and 0 cents when I had a mop in my hand. That is the exact valuation I now assign to your merger agreement. I turned back, the noise of the panic-stricken room fading slightly behind me. The deal is cancelled, Mr. Maxwell. Effective now. He stumbled back, his face a mask of shock and sheer financial terror. He tried to grab the notice, crumpling the paper in his fist. Wait, we can negotiate. What do you want? Name your price. A position. Equity. We can offer you. I raised my hand, silencing him immediately. I wasn't interested in his pity or his delayed gratitude. There is no price, Mr. Maxwell. You see, the cost was already paid. The cost was the humiliation I felt when you looked at me and decided I was less than human. I picked up my phone, dialing a number I knew by heart. Hello, Mr. Chen. Yes, it's Amara. The meeting is adjourned. Please prepare the official statement for immediate public release. I believe we have a rather large market adjustment coming this afternoon. The gravity of the situation hit them all simultaneously. My intention was not leverage. My intention was destruction. Not of the company, but of the arrogance that ran it. As I started to walk towards the door, Miss Davis stood up slowly, her expression grim but respectful. Miss Johnson, this decision, the financial ramifications for everyone here are profound. Are you prepared for the fallout? I stopped, turning back to the room one last time. I felt the weight of my ancestors' sacrifice, the quiet fight of every black woman who was underestimated in a boardroom or a break room. I was prepared the day I filed the initial patents, Miss Davies. I have been preparing for this moment my entire life. I reached the door and paused. Maxwell was sputtering, his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his top legal team. Oh, one last thing, Mr. Maxwell, I called out. He stopped, hanging on my every word, desperate for a reprieve. My cleaning shift ends in 20 minutes. I expect the payment for the full 4 hours of labor to be wired to Meridian Cleaning by the end of the day. Failure to pay wages is a matter I will handle personally. With that final cut, I opened the door and walked out, leaving the chaos behind me. The sound of shouting voices and chattering couriers echoed faintly in the hallway. But the fight wasn't truly over. My team warned me that Maxwell wouldn't simply absorb $1 billion loss. He would try to invalidate my ownership, expose my shell structure, or worse, try to claim the IP was developed on his time, even if I was working for a cleaning crew. I had won the battle of dignity, but the war for ownership was just beginning. And I knew exactly where he would strike first: the legal gray area surrounding the initial funding documents I used years ago, the ones I thought were safe. The air in the room did not breathe. It stopped, thick and cold, around Mr. Sterling's shaking hands. He looked at me, not as Ava, the junior analyst, or Ava, the cleaning staff, but as the sudden, catastrophic obstacle. The room, minutes ago, filled with arrogance and celebration, became a tomb of corporate failure. His lawyers were fighting the impossible. They argued semantics. They argued contract law. They cited boilerplate clauses about employee innovation assignment. But Mr. Davies, my counsel, remained utterly calm. He merely pointed to the original IP registration documents, dated 2 years prior to my employment, registered under a shell company I controlled. The Nexus score was mine. The merger died without it. Sterling finally lowered his head. The color had drained from his face, leaving only a sickly gray. "Ava," he whispered, his voice cracking. He tried to reclaim the old patronizing authority. "We are talking about $1 billion. Think of the shareholders." I folded my hands on the table. I thought instead of the broom closet. I thought of my grandmother, who cleaned corporate floors for 40 years, never being seen, never being heard. "I am thinking of value, Mr. Sterling," I replied. My voice was steady, utterly devoid of the fear I had lived with for months. "And the value of Nexus score is not $1 billion to me." He saw the opening. He lunged for it, desperate. "Then name your price. A lifetime salary, an executive seat. We can make you vice president of innovation tomorrow. We can make you richer than you ever dreamed." He was still operating on the assumption that money was the ultimate motivator, that every problem could be solved by throwing gold at the young black girl who got too smart. I shook my head slowly. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. I have plenty of my own now." His mouth opened agape. He couldn't grasp the concept of power leveraged purely for justice, not personal profit. "My demands are simple, and they are non-negotiable," I stated, listing them off my mental ledger, the script I had rehearsed in my head every night since the humiliation. First, every executive who referred to me as the hired help or the cleaner must be immediately terminated for cause. No golden parachutes. That list includes Mr. Thompson and Ms. Ramirez. He bristled. "That is highly punitive. They have families." So did my grandmother, who worked double shifts so her family could eat while men like you laughed at the mess she cleaned, I countered, the memory sharp and cold. "Consequences painful, Mr. Sterling. You taught me that." "Second," I continued, ignoring his sputtering protest, "a full public recorded statement must be issued by the corporate board of directors, not just admitting to discriminatory practices, but apologizing specifically for the classist and racist treatment directed at me, Ava Jenkins, on company property." His entire legal team surged forward, shaking their heads violently. "We can't do that, Miss Jenkins. That is an admission of liability that could open us up to billions in lawsuits." "Exactly," I said simply. The silence returned, heavier this time. They realized I wasn't trying to save the deal for them. I was trying to change the entire system they had built. Sterling pleaded one last time. He appealed to my professional obligation. "Ava, look at me. If this merger fails, hundreds of people lose jobs. You become infamous. You become the villain who destroyed a major transaction just because of hurt feelings." I felt the immense weight of the transaction settle on my shoulders. But the pressure no longer broke me. It sharpened me. "My feelings were not hurt, Mr. Sterling. My dignity was stolen, and unlike a $1 billion merger, dignity is something that cannot be replaced once it is gone. I stood up, adjusting the lapels of my impeccably tailored suit. The power shift was now physical. I towered over them, even sitting down. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to present the signed termination letters and the finalized public apology draft. If the conditions are not met, I walk away, and the Nexus score vanishes from your balance sheet forever. I paused at the door, turning back to the room where my life had changed completely. The deal is cancelled, Mr. Sterling, I confirmed, letting the cold reality sink into him. Unless you are prepared to pay the real price of justice. I left the negotiation room, leaving behind the wreckage of their arrogance. The battle was won, but the war for institutional change had just been declared. I knew they would try every trick in the book overnight to find a way around my demands. They would certainly try to buy me out one last time. I waited for the inevitable phone call, the final desperate offer that would try to break the woman they thought was nothing more than a cleaning lady. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, it was the sound of $1 billion vaporizing into thin air. Mr. Sterling's face had lost its color entirely. He looked like a statue, carved out of cheap soap, now melting under pressure. He tried to recover the situation, desperately. Miss Hayes, Amelia, I see there has been a massive error in communication, he stammered, rubbing his temples. We had no idea. Of course, this is an oversight, a joke taken too far, a terribly inappropriate joke. He was scrambling now, throwing dignity out the window he had just expected me to wipe clean. The IP is critical, Amelia. We know it. You know it. We can triple the offer. We can offer you a seat on the advisory board. Anything you want. His eyes, minutes ago burning with dismissive arrogance, now pleaded with me. He looked across the table at the shocked Omnicorp team, then back at me, calculating his life slipping away. This is business, Ms. Hayes. Personal feelings aside, we must complete this merger. Think of the shareholders. I kept my voice low, smooth, steady. Mr. Sterling, you are right. This is business. I paused and let my gaze sweep over the expensive mahogany table. The stains of his arrogance were still visible to me, even if the actual coffee spill was gone. The merger required the full perpetual license transfer of the Prometheus X architecture. I lifted the folder with the corporate policy of Phoenix Rising Tech. It was thin but heavy with authority. My company's policy is very clear. Section 4, Clause C. I recited the words slowly, ensuring every syllable landed like a judgment. Phoenix Rising Tech reserves the right to terminate any active licensing negotiation immediately if senior corporate partners fail to maintain an environment of professional respect or if they engage in targeted acts of degradation, classism, or racial bias against any staff member or contractor associated with our company, regardless of their position or perceived status. Sterling started shaking his head, realizing the trap he had walked into. You called me the help, Mr. Sterling. You used my temporary cleaning duties to humiliate me publicly in front of two major corporate leadership teams. You reduced my worth, my 40-year history in technology, to the price of a mop bucket. You made a decision about who I was based solely on the color of my skin and the task I was performing at that exact moment. The Omnicorp CEO, a stern woman named Ms. Davies, finally spoke up, glaring at Sterling. Did this really happen, Sterling? Sterling merely hung his head, confirming the accusation without a word. I looked at Ms. Davies, ignoring Sterling entirely. Ms. Davies, you should understand that toxic corporate environments breed unstable partnerships. Phoenix Rising Tech cannot afford to tie its future IP development to a company whose CEO views basic human dignity as disposable. I closed the folder sharply, The sound echoed in the massive room. The license transfer is formally cancelled. I confirmed it 3 separate times. In the formal language of corporate law. Cancelled. Terminated. Voided. Sterling leaped forward, grasping the edge of the table. You can't! The preliminary agreements. The preliminary agreements, Mr. Sterling, were contingent upon maintaining a respectful professional environment, a condition you breached 30 minutes ago. His eyes welled up. He looked completely broken. The shock was turning into genuine, painful failure. Amelia, please. My career. Everything. This is everything. I finally met his eye, and the kindness I felt for the broken man was distant, professional. Your career, Mr. Sterling, is the sum of your decisions. You decided the value of the woman cleaning your conference room. Today, that decision cost you your legacy. I spoke one final, deeply personal truth that cut deeper than any legal jargon. My grandmother cleaned offices like this for 50 years to ensure my mother and I had opportunities you take for granted. She was invisible to men like you. Today, I was visible, and I refused to be treated like she was. I gathered my papers. My hands were steady. My heart felt heavy, but also impossibly light. I walked toward the door. I paused by Miss Davies. Miss Davies, I said smoothly, I apologize for the delay this causes. Please have your people contact my corporate affairs department. We would be happy to discuss independent partnership opportunities outside of Zenith Global. I left the room without waiting for a response. Outside the door, the janitor's cart was still parked. The faint scent of bleach and floor polish hung in the air. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands that held the 1B patent. They were the hands that had just wiped a coffee stain. The cart felt like an altar now, a testament. I put the cleaning rag, which I had briefly held in my moment of humiliation, neatly back on its hook. I took one deep, clean breath. The air outside the boardroom no longer felt heavy with expectation, nor dark with shame. I had come in to clean up a spill. I ended up cleaning the entire corporation. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about the dignified refusal to be silenced. It was about walking away, knowing that your true worth was finally recognized, even if the price of that recognition was the downfall of an empire.